Hey everyone, welcome to another amazing episode of Inspired Action, where we dive into the most pressing leadership challenges and hope to inspire you to take a more coach-centered and people-focused approach to leadership. I'm your host, Kyle Pertuis, and it's time to get started with our three amazing guests today. Hey everybody, welcome to Inspired Action. I'm your host, Kyle Pertuis, and I'm here with three amazing guests today to answer this question. What strategies can we employ to ensure all voices are heard in discussions? We hear more and more about a collaborative workplace, so I'm excited to hear what these three have to say. But first, let me do a quick intro. We have Courtney Muller, who's the VP of People and Executive Coach at Courtney Muller Career and Leadership Coaching. We have Sarah Maley, who's also a professional coach and owner of Sarah Maley Coaching. And last but not least, we have Seth Flowers, regional sales manager with Cazzini Brothers, and also the owner of Go Big Coaching and Consulting. Thank you guys so much for being here. I cannot wait to hear each of your responses. So let's jump right in. A reminder, and Courtney, we're going to start with you, but just a reminder, that question for you: what strategies can we employ to ensure all voices are heard in discussion?
Awesome. Thank you. So when I was thinking about this question, I was thinking about what I do with teams. And one of the things that I do is really try to set the tone early on in terms of how I show up from a leadership perspective, as well as how I try to build culture around this. So if I'm kicking off a new project or a type of meeting, a reoccurring meeting, I really try to set clear expectations from the start around how we're going to engage and collaborate as a team. And I've used something called rules of engagement. And this was taught to me by a previous manager, but really looking at how do we interact? How do we collaborate? How do we make sure that, each person in the room is encouraged to speak up and share their perspective? And me as a leader, how can I help facilitate that? So, up front, maybe it's a round robin where everybody can, share their ideas from the start of that session, or we'll time block, for each person to make sure that everybody has a chance to speak. But really, how can I help facilitate, equitability across the board in those conversations? And the other thing I've tried to do with these rules of engagement is really collaborate on those from the start. So, I'll start to, put some ideas on the table, but we'll have a discussion around, okay, how do we want to engage in this meeting type so that everybody feels like they're part of that process and they're more bought into, in creating that inclusive environment from the start. So I think with this, it's not just setting those, rules of engagement, but how do we stay consistent with it? How do we make sure that we're using it, ongoing? But these are some of the things that I've learned over the years.
Yeah, I love it. It's kind of that whole design for dialogue, right? Not domination, and having somebody that can
Exactly.
facilitate that process to keep it moving. Love it. Let's jump over to Sarah. Sarah, same question for you. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, the beauty of going second is first I get to say ditto to what Courtney said because there's so much about around the preparation for this, and I think Courtney spoke so beautifully with that peace in mind. Where I would like to add is so often we need to really understand how we naturally show up. And there's a lot of, whether we say ego, brain science, lots of different reasons why it can be positively reinforcing to step in a conversation and share with folks how smart we are, how we're right, how there's like a right answer and a wrong answer. And if you notice, when we approach that, and by the way, it's with the best of intentions. We're all well intended. But if we're not self aware, we're going to come into a conversation with our default mode. And if that default mode, although well intended, is I have a right answer and there's a right or wrong. Because if you notice, if we come into a conversation with our answer already formed, we're coming in with judgment because if we're already clear on what our answer is, we now are potentially judging others in the room who think differently. So it might be very coachy of me as I hang out with this group of coaches, is another approach is to be very curious and going back to what Courtney said, clear on what your role of engagement is. Am I here to learn from folks? Am I here to better understand what another point of view is? And you notice with those two reframes, I just potentially come at that conversation with curiosity and less judgment.
Yeah, no question. I think as you were kind of talking through, especially that first part about people processing the right answer and want to show how smart they are, I think a big piece in opening our minds and ears to a collective voice is really encouraging that first draft thinking, right? Let's lay it down. Let it be messy. Let it be unpolished thought. Come without any pressure and just put it on the table so we can all kind of play with whatever that is and see what we can grow from. Right? I love it. Steph, let's move over to you. What are your thoughts? And you can't say ditto, ditto. I mean, I guess you can, but I know you've got some things to add as well.
Well, and I do. I think that Courtney and Sarah really bring up great points, and one of the things that I've learned as a leader is expectations are the key across the board. One of the things I thought about when I came into this is a lot of times people are heard via their performance, and people will always rise to expectations. But I think a lot of times leaders don't ever set those expectations, so people don't know what they need to rise to. And so when you're being heard, I think the number one thing that you have to do is that setting expectations. What's going to be the rules of engagement? What is the standard for a standard meeting? What are my expectations for your performance out there? But at the end of the day, also, is we have to know our people. Some people want to be heard vocally. Some people want to be heard via their performance. Some people want to be heard via the work that they do on a project. And so just privately telling them, man, you really knocked it out of the park, or even just using their work in a group setting and privately letting them know, hey, I'm going to be using this moving forward, because they don't want the recognition in a public place. But knowing your people and how they want to be heard is one of the best ways that you can make sure that they are heard. And so when you're setting those expectations, it's true. I think so many times we go into meetings and we don't even know how we're going to act. What's this setting? What is going to be talked about? When do I get a chance to talk? But then at the same time, outside of those meetings is going to be, what am I supposed to be performing to? What are my expectations? I think the same thing, Kyle, that you kind of started this off with is talking about going into a seminar or something like that. What are the expectations coming out of this? Like, what am I supposed to be doing? What am I going to take away? One thing, 10 things, 5 things? What is it? And I think when we're heard, we know what the expectations are that we're going to come out to, and we know how to use our personalities to be heard through that.
Yeah, I love that around expectations, man, because that also contributes to accountability, right? And I think expectations often become one-sided. Like, Seth, this is what I expect from you. We have to kind of reciprocate that. Like, Seth, what do you expect from me as your leader? So we understand kind of resources, support, all of those kind of things. So there's a thing that I use in team coaching as well, kind of going back to your rules of engagement, Courtney, that we call in, don't call out, right? So here's the question, and you guys jump in however you want, right? No form right now, just for the last 8 or 10 minutes. How do you encourage people that may be maybe a little less inclined to engage or participate vocally without putting them on the spot, right? So how do you encourage that type of behavior by calling them in as opposed to calling them out? Say, Sarah, you hadn't said anything yet. Why don't you speak up on this topic? It's a little bit confrontation, right? So what are your thoughts on how do we call people in when they're not as vocal as others to make sure there's an inclusive and more of a collaborative approach to getting the thinking on the table?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll jump in. The first thought that comes to mind, especially with the brainstorming kind of part of a meeting, is if we can pair up or be in small groups to generate some of those ideas. And then when as we get into like larger groups or a big room discussion, then that voice can potentially be heard, whether it's from that person who initially said it or that idea got on the table. It's probably the first thing that came to mind, but I'm interested in others' thoughts.
Yeah, I love that because, right, even so, if you and I are sharing and I'm a little timid to bring it up, and then we're talking about it, so I'm comfortable in that setting, and then there's 6 of us, and Seth says, "Hey, what came up between, Sarah, you and Kyle? What came up?" And I'm like, "Oh, go ahead." And then you can share my idea, right? If I don't want to do it. Yeah, that's fantastic. I love it.
Well, and I also believe that setting the table properly is one of the big keys to getting engagement from your team. And what I mean by that is that as a leader of a meeting or as a leader of a discussion, I shouldn't be winging it walking into the conversation. And so if I've set the table properly and I know that Courtney has an amazing idea on this subject that I'm about to be bringing to the table of this meeting, whether it's a big group or a small group, giving Courtney the confidence to talk about this and bring what she's good at to the table is a conversation one-on-one beforehand. Hey, Courtney, I loved when we were talking one-on-one the other day. You said this about XYZ. I'm actually going to be having a group meeting. Would you mind speaking to that and just kind of bringing it up to the table? Because what you said really threw me just for a loop. And I believe that the value you can add to the group is going to be contagious. And I think if you set that table properly, the people that aren't comfortable just speaking out, when you call on them, they have the confidence they need to speak up.
Mm-hmm.
It's that empowering. It's kind of like drawing them in, right? Like, Seth, you always have a unique lens. What's coming up for you on this kind of thing, right? Yeah, I love it. Courtney, what would you add?
Yeah, I think the other thing I was thinking of here was to give people different platforms to contribute. So kind of similar to what Sarah was saying, if there's breakout rooms, that could be good for, smaller discussion. The other thing I'm thinking is like the chat box or being able to sort of encourage the different platforms of contributing, because sometimes people just may not feel comfortable to talk live in that group setting, and how could they still share ideas without maybe necessarily speaking out live.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think that comes up a lot, I would say more recently, but the chats or some type of shared document before you engage in that kind of thing can be huge, because then at least it's there, right? Whether you elaborate
Right.
on it or not, there's always going to be those that are, somewhat hesitant or more timid in those groups. But if it's on the table, that's what we want, right? Let's get it out there and create that field for thinking to happen so that we can then act on it. What about I love this. I wish we had another hour. One more quick question here. What do you do when it is quite obvious that someone has committed what I call idea theft, right? So maybe I'm kind of the timid one in the group, and I lean over to Seth and say, "Yeah, we probably should consider this strategy." And then somewhere, 10, 15, 20 minutes into the meeting, when it elevates Seth because he's more vocal and everybody loves Seth, he's like, "Oh, I think we should probably consider this strategy." Right. And sometimes those things happen. So how do we deter that, or how do we encourage people to reclaim or redirect where the credit should be?
I'll jump in here. I think the number one thing that you have to do is set up a culture of humility, and also a culture of supporting your teammates. Um, at the end of the day, if you create an environment within an organization that a team's success is our individual success, then you will have less of that. I don't think you'll ever eliminate it. But at the end of the day, when us as leaders step forward, we have to start off by giving credit to other people. So if we as the leader of the meeting or the organization or whatever come into it giving credit where credit is due. So Sarah, you had a really great idea. I'd love for you to speak to that. Versus always having all the ideas, then that creates that culture of humility, and your teammates will feed off of that.
Good. I like it.
I think one thing I would add just around, I guess, when you observe those behaviors or when you might be a part of seeing that happen in action. How can we encourage people to speak up and to, reclaim their idea? Or if they're not comfortable doing it in the group setting, might they go to their manager and speak on it? But I think it's definitely valid for Seth to say, how can we build a culture where this doesn't happen? But when it does, and sometimes it does, what can we do to encourage people to do the right thing, to speak up, to make sure that they're able to identify those behaviors as not acceptable. They're not aligned with the culture, and, being able to learn from it, correct it, be able to move forward from it and not see that happen again,
Absolutely.
Yeah. And just and add a little note on top of what was already said is it does go back to the clear expectations of facilitating the meeting, so that if there are great ideas, we want to hear them. So less sidebar conversations. But if or when it does happen, it could be when we go to break. We go to check on that person to better understand, or even ask, how did that idea come to be? Or even at the end of a meeting, it'd be like, we have talked so much time exploring this topic. If as you have more thoughts, please let me know. So kind of we can keep that thinking and that openness still alive.
Yeah, awesome. All right, you guys. Love this question and all that kind of unfolded out of strategies we can employ to ensure all voices are heard in discussions. I think some incredible insight from all three of you. As we know, this is at the heart of building high performing and engaged teams. And so I think all of that was shared is golden. And for those of you watching, if you're serious about ensuring that all voices are heard in your organizations, not just the loud ones, pay attention to some of these nuggets. All right, you guys, thanks for watching, and we will look forward to seeing you next Thursday at noon Central.